coming up for the last talk of the day. I'm sure we're going to see some great posters later on. This is mainly a sales pitch, but it's a sales pitch for a really cool, neat idea that brings what we can solve to a nice new level. So I really want to sell this to you guys to have your problems come to this new wonderful world of non-deterministic planning. So what we did here is, got a pointer that changed the slides. That's okay. So the motivation behind this is that we introduced PRP back in 2012, and it did really well for non-deterministic planning problems, fully observable ones. It really advanced state of the art, but there's a lot of domains that require conditional effects when you want to use non-determinism. You can think of contingent encodings for contingent planning problems. A lot of the probabilistic planning problems had tons of conditional effects, and this was really a drawback. And so beside that, at the same time, and the reason why we didn't do conditional effects is because regression, this one technique that we rely heavily on to be so successful with PRP, it's at the heart of PRP's computational core. So adapting it for conditional effects back in 2012 was daunting, but now it's new and exciting and fun for us to think about how we can do it. So we do have a nice solution here, but it could be much better, and I'm open to ideas if people want to come talk to me later on. So the outline, usual stuff, I'll talk a bit about PRP and then our solution of how we actually handle conditional effects and a little bit on evaluation before concluding. So the notation we need, we're in a multi-valued setting. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's a short paper, short presentation, but we have a finite set of variables, our initial state, a goal state, which is a partial state, and the set of non-deterministic actions. So again here, the initial state is a complete state, which is a setting to all of your variables, and partial state, it's just a setting to a subset of those variables. So goal state, for example, is a partial state. The actions, every action has the form where it's a precondition that has to be satisfied, and a finite set of effects. And now, with non-deterministic planning with conditional effects, every effect is of the form of a set of conditional effects. You know, if condition 1 holds in your current state, which is a partial state, then you should set the value of variable 1 to the value d1. Right? Nothing too new, nothing too crazy. This is one concept that is absolutely vital to the efficiency of PRP. We saw Triangle Tire World a few times today. Without using regression, without really looking at what's relevant about your state, we solved maybe 6, 7 problems instead of the 36 or 37 that we do now. So regression is absolutely vital. Now, I'm only going to define regression here, not for conditional effects, but what was done back in 2012. So this is just a regular effect, no conditions, V1 goes to D1 and so on. And intuitively what it gives you is the partial state just before applying an action that allows for a partial state to hold after the action. So what you feed into regression here is, I shouldn't have used S, I should have used P. It's a partial state, so it's some setting of the variables, and you want to ask yourself what must have held just before you executed A in order for that partial state to hold. Right? And so a picture might make it a little more clear. Along the bottom, imagine we have our sequence of actions, you know, A1 through AN, and the states that correspond to it, your initial state and so on, to the final state where the goal holds SN. Regression just goes the other way. Everybody knows progression very well. Regression is very similar, but it just goes back through the action and it says, okay, if I wanted to be in location 2 and I moved from location 1 to 2, then I should be in location 1 before then. That's the general idea of what's going on with regression. Now, regression with conditional effects, it's a little more problematic because you don't know what conditional effects have actually fired before you apply the action. And so when you do the full proper regression with conditional effects, what you end up with is a very, potentially a very messy and large formula. It's no longer just a partial state, but you could put it into a form where it's disjunctive normal form, a set of partial states that could have led to the partial state you care about. Right? So that's the key thing that we want to get over with here. So FOND, we've seen a number of these things before. You've got 3 types of solutions for FOND planning. A weak plan that has some chance of reaching your goal. Maybe not all of the states you reach get to your goal because of non-determinism. A strong plan, you're guaranteed to reach your goal and there's no cycles, but it's a little less interesting for a lot of the problems we look at. And finally, strong cyclic plans. You're guaranteed to reach the goal at some point in the future. And you do allow cycles. And so we also have an assumption of fairness here that if you keep executing the same action, all of the outcomes will occur at some point. I think I can skip over that part. So the general algorithm, again, if I had more time, I would go into this, but it's very, very simple. Actually, ignore this slide. Let's look back here. The weak plan at the top, the general algorithm looks at one of those x's and it says, hey, I don't know what to do in this x. This state is completely lost to me. And so what it will do is determinize, and we've seen the all outcomes determinization a number of times today, find another weak plan from that x state and sort of get yourself to the goal from that one state you didn't know how to handle. So it's an iterative process that goes through all of the states you don't know how to handle, and when it doesn't know how to handle a state, you update the policy with some new weak plan that will handle that state. So really it's just this update policy thing that we're concerned with here. Now inside of update policy, you determinize, and we use the all outcomes determinization. Every non-deterministic action with k effects becomes k new actions, and you can choose which one you want to apply. And you compute a new classical plan with this determinized domain. Now from that plan, this was the trick where we used regression, and this is the repeated regression back through here. And this tells you the condition pi that needs to hold in order for some suffix, ai to an, in order to achieve your goal. So if you consider the last 3 steps in this classical plan, you ask yourself, yeah, I know the complete state that led me to this goal in 3 steps, but what's the relevant subset of that complete state for those 3 steps to achieve my goal? And doing this allows us to generalize the sort of the policy that we produce with these weak plans, and really leads to the efficiency in PRP. But of course, regression is difficult. And regression is difficult with conditional effects especially, right? So we want to avoid having to deal with these big, nasty, complex formulas just in order to get the condition of what needs to hold for a suffix of this plan to get to our goal. Okay. Am I good so far? You guys understand the need and the nicety of regression? So what we end up doing here is substituting this one little step, this regression that we have, to handle conditional effects. We replace it with an approximation. Right? So we call this approximation PRIMF. It stands for pre-image filtering. And the intuition here is that we want to have a partial state, not a set of partial states, but a single partial state that characterizes what must hold just prior to executing the action in order for the partial state afterwards to hold, right? So this, the black text there is exactly the same text that was on an earlier slide for regression. This is what we want, and the one difference is with conditional effects, we need to figure out how to compute this one single partial state in order to tell us the relevant conditions. So the extra thing that we take in here to define PRIMF is the context of when this was actually used. So a few definitions just to go through what we're going to do to compute this partial state. Added is going to be all of the variables that were actually added when you applied this action, right? And it's predicated on this context state of where we came from. So if a conditional effect fired when we applied this action, then the variable that was added to it is now in our set added, right? So we need to know everything that this action sort of added to our state. Support, and this is, I want you to know for those who are really paying attention, we actually go over all of the conditional effects and we look at all of the things that would determine when the conditions fire for this particular action, right? And then finally, we can define this PRIMF operator in terms of, you know, if it was in the support set, so if it was required in order to determine how this executed, then we're going to use that value sort of as a precondition. And if it wasn't, then we get to remove it, otherwise it stays the same. So this may be a little complicated, and I can explain it in detail at the poster session later, but there's some intuitive things that I want to point out with this PRIMF operator. First, the state that we were in when we applied this action, it entails this partial state, the PRIMF operator. So this is a very good and essential property we need to have in order for everything to still be correct. Second, the PRIMF operator actually entails the real regression. So it is an approximation of regression in the sense that whatever PRIMF gives us, it's something stronger than what the real regression would have given us. And finally, if there's no conditional effects for this particular action, then the PRIMF operator is exactly the same as regular regression. So this is a nice property so that when we change PRP, it's still going to work in all of the original domains just as it did before. So the bottom line here is that PRIMF, it gives us the single partial state that while less general regression, it allows us to reason efficiently about the relevant portion of what that action actually required in order to achieve a partial state afterwards. So the evaluation, there's of course not a lot of competitors for non-deterministic planning with conditional effects, so we don't really compare with other solvers in the market. We tried, but I think MVP was able to solve 1 or 2 instances of all of the domains that we gave it. So we're just going to show things quickly with PRP here. And the thing that's interesting about these results isn't that we're better, faster, or so on, but it actually points out new, interesting, non-deterministic domains for these fawn planners to try and take a crack at. So there's certain things where where PRP with conditional effects doesn't work as well as we'd like, and so it's really pointing to some new holes in research potential here. So there was 4 domains. Search and rescue is based on a probabilistic domain, I believe. The thing to note in search and rescue is there's 15 problems. Actually, only 5 I can really claim PRP was able to solve. There's no strong cyclic solution, and for any problem higher, it has a hard time finally deciding that, yes, there's no more solution here. And we just put a cap on the time limit of 10 seconds, and it was able to find the best sort of plan by the end, but it wasn't able to prove it was the best. So that's why one point of future work here. Sloppy schedule, it's a regular classical domain that we sort of altered to have non-deterministic outcomes as well. It already has lots of conditional effects, and the thing with sloppy schedule, we were only 2/3 of the coverage, and it's because the weak planning procedure is really difficult. Up till now, PRP never faced a hard time computing a weak plan, so this is a new avenue as well. Finally, buggy myconic and tedious tire worlds. Just more of the same, and the thing to point out with tedious tire worlds, it is something now that has non-deterministic effects and conditional effects, and we just wanted to make sure a sanity check to say that we still have the same coverage that PRP had with the regular tire worlds. We're not shooting ourselves in the foot by adding conditional effects and using PRIMP. So I'll skip over, like I said, the evaluation stuff isn't so interesting. You can see the paper for it. But in summary, we extended PRP with this PRIMP operator to now allow us to solve problems with conditional effects and non-deterministic actions. We identified the strengths and weaknesses of the new approach, and so you can see the paper for further details on what's actually troubling PRP now. And we also do have a new suite of benchmarks that will hopefully become a standard to challenge the FON planners going forward. So in future work, we would like to apply this to one of the realms where you have conditional effects and non-deterministic actions, revisit the PRIMP definition to try and generalize this a bit further. It is a little strong of an approximation, and also possibly consider the full regression, the proper regression inside of PRP for problems with conditional effects. But of course, we went ahead and did the first one already, so we're moving on to the second. And if you'd like to know more details, I'm actually doing a shifted poster session to span 2. I've combined both posters, and I'll be there from 5 to 6, and I can talk about how we actually tackled contingent planning problems with PRP now equipped to handle conditional effects. So with that, if you have any questions, the benchmarks, code, slides, everything is available as of 3 hours ago. So feel free to take it and run. Thanks.
Okay, questions? Jörg.
Yep.
Okay, thank you for the talk. Really just for clarification, I mean, you've been so quick, I admit I just missed it. So if nobody minds, could you explain like 2 of the points in your technique? So this magical state SC, or what do you call it, where does it come from? I mean,
yeah, so this is the best slide to describe it. I'm going to step away from the mic and speak loudly. So normally when you compute a weak plan, you've got your sequence of actions and the complete states that goes forward. When you're doing regression, you just have these partial states that come back. So in this case, this is our SC. This is the context in which this action was applied.
oh, okay, so you're just using the states that you actually visited during the forward.
Yes, we just used the state that was going forward. And what this gives us, the bottom line point here, is it fully characterizes every conditional effect that could fire, and it determines which ones do fire and which ones don't. So there's no more ambiguity about which conditional effects fire.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So because you use the conditional effect that actually did fire in the weak plan.
Exactly. So the partial state that's computed with PRIMP, it's going to fire the exact same conditional effects if you apply this action again. So we're sort of locking in the conditional effects, the configuration of which one's fired for that.
So in some
weak
sense,
plan.
it limits the generalization capability a bit, right?
It does. So that's why PRIMP, while it is, where's the 3 properties? PRIMP does sit somewhere in between the complete state and the full regression, and we would like to get it closer to the full regression. And there's actually some simple things you can think of, probably off the top of your head, to make this better than it is. And that's why it's one of the future work things high on the list. Yeah.
Okay, I think I also found it hard to get the definition of PRIMP, but maybe let's take that one offline.
Sure, yeah, it's on the poster, yeah.
Okay, one more.
No?
I had one clarification. So you said you can apply this to contingent planning. You mean partial observable? Or not?
Yes, planning with partial observability of a restricted form. Yeah. Simple contingent planning problems is what we tackle. close.
Okay,
And I mean,
because-
we're using previous stuff that translates it to font,
Okay.
and using one of a very similar encoding to try and
Okay, because there's been a whole lot of work on conditional effects in partially observable and non-observable planning, because you kind of need those in order to do anything useful.
Exactly, yeah, and that's all of these contingent translations and all of the probabilistic tracks that have, we would like to handle it with a fond planner, just strip away the probabilities and see what happens. Many of them have a lot of conditional effects, and you need to handle it proper. You can't compile it away. You just can't.
Okay, and let's thank our speaker again. That's the end of our session. Thank you.